Hey Maggie, this is Miss Brockle's PowerPoint that I put together for you to put or to help you study for your 9 weeks test. It's not in order of the test questions, but this slideshow will show you everything that you need to make sure that you study for. After looking at it, there's not a whole lot that we didn't cover, so some of this should be familiar to you. So our first slide gives us a definition of organism, that is any living thing. So any living thing, plant, animal, bacteria, anything that is alive is an organism. Chlorophyll. In a plant cell, the chloroplasts make a pigment called chlorophyll. This is what gives the plant a green color. So know that plants are green because of the chlorophyll. There are some other jobs of the chlorophyll, but the pigment that is green is what makes the plant green. But chlorophyll does capture the sunlight and is the key component in the photosynthesis. We have a picture of a leaf showing the stomata, and the stomata are these little openings right here. And so plants take in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. After the process is done, it releases oxygen. And where that all happens is right here in the stomata. So these are the openings on the underside of the leaf that allow exchanges of gas. So just remember, we talked about this in our matter unit, that when I say exchange of gases, that I'm talking about carbon dioxide and oxygen, because those are two gases. We also talked about the formula for photosynthesis, and I told everybody it was kind of like a math equation. And this picture kind of gives a good idea of what that is. And so as long as you know what goes on the left-hand side versus the right-hand side, then you're good. It doesn't have to be in exact order, but these three things need to be on the left side. These two things need to be on the left. So it's sunlight plus carbon dioxide plus water equals glucose, which is sugar, and oxygen. So just know the oxygen is the byproduct of photosynthesis. It is waste. Plants do not need it, so they release it through the stomata. But they do use the glucose. That's their energy. There, we did a graphic organizer with this, and it was the 4 needs of plants. And it kind of confused some of the other students, so I don't want you to get confused. But in order to grow, so you can have more plants, and to ensure that they can photosynthesize and remain producers, they need water, sunlight, carbon dioxide, and nutrients. Nutrients has been the big hang-up on people. Nutrients is important. That's what is giving them enough minerals to be healthy, kind of like how you take a vitamin. And so in our picture here, I wanted to point out, so here's our water, here's our sun. When we say air, we're speaking of carbon dioxide because that's what they need. But then we have here, I chose this image for it was cute because it had donut, right? But soil with nutrients. Now soil is a very important thing for most plants. The majority of plants do grow with soil. But remember, plants don't have to have soil. So that leads us to our next slide. So plants need nutrients, but those nutrients do not have to come from just soil. Okay, so we learn plants don't use soil they don't eat it. They use soil as a way to hang out in the ground and not blow away with the wind or wash away with the water. Okay, soil allows those roots to grab hold, and also the nutrients. But that's not always feasible in some areas, and so some newer technology allowed the hydroponics. Now, what makes hydroponics special, which, hydro means water, is the water is mixed in with nutrients, and it's given to the plants on a regular basis. And so this allows the plant to grow without soil. And as you see here, in some of the smaller populations, or bigger populations where you really can't plant things, like big cities and stuff, they're able to actually grow fresh produce there by using hydroponics. I found this picture just to show you this plant has been growing with no soil. But then you do have here an exception. The main thing I'm wanting to know is hydroponics. But we did talk about how Venus flytraps, now they do go through photosynthesis, but the photosynthesis isn't enough to ensure that they have enough energy to continue to grow, to reproduce. They make just enough, so they need nutrients to fulfill the requirements, and so they're kind of an exception to that as well. And so I used the word a minute ago, producers. The definition is a producer, it's any living thing that can make their own food. And that's by using the sun and the energy from the sun. We make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but we don't make those ingredients. So just know that plants make their own food internally. They don't have to reach for a jar of peanut butter or a knife to spoon that up. They make it within, they use it as they need it, they store what they don't need. But the process of making their own food, of course, is photosynthesis. Examples, you may need to know examples. So your green plants are going to be your producers. So, there's just a variety of trees. A lot of people still don't always want to think of a plant being a tree, bushes, things of that nature. Consumers. Okay, consumers are the type of organisms that must consume other things in order to get energy. So they have to feed off of other living things in order to have enough energy to do what their body needs it to do. I know the picture's kind of gross, but I like the wordage on here, and but it is life. They got to eat just like we got to eat. Consumers. So we know consumers must feed on other things, but there's three types of consumers. We have herbivores. Those are the animals that eat only plants. Remember, plants or any kind of plant material. So we're talking about acorns, vegetables, fruits, parts of the tree like the bark, saplings, things like that. That falls under the category of being an herbivore. Omnivores, they eat both plant and animals. Or maybe not necessarily animals, but maybe something that is considered of having something quote-unquote meat. Carnivores, we always say it's a meat eater, but I don't know if you had a chance to do your activity that I sent home with the Roadkill Cafe, but even if something eats like earthworms and beetles and ants, like a frog does, a frog is still considered a carnivore because they don't eat plants. So if it's not a plant, it's considered quote-unquote meat. Food chains, I think you're pretty solid on that, but just know the first organism, now that's the key word here. The sun is always first because that's where it begins, but the sun is not an organism. So all organisms that are the first organisms in a food chain is going to be a producer. The energy from the sun's transferred to the plant, then something has to eat that plant. And as you see, other organisms in that food chain are called consumers, and they may be different kinds. And those were the ones that I just went over. So you have your different types of consumers here in the image. Here's another food chain. It looks a little different than the ones that we did, but I did want to show it because I did want to talk about this because I think you did miss a little bit. So the end of the food chain, it doesn't just stop. So here we have sun, we've got the grass, then you have or the plants, then you have the grasshopper eats the plants, the mice eat the grasshoppers, the snake eats the mice, and then our eagle eats the snake. But eventually that eagle's going to die, and his body will decompose, and those help provide the nutrients back into the soil that we need to ensure future growth of more plants. Arrows in the food web, those are showing movement. That's the direction, and so the energy is what is moving. It is the like this says, from the food to the eater. So don't get it backwards, just like the one down at the bottom. Consumption, the arrows are not talking about who eats what. It's where the energy goes. So energy is showing the flow, or the arrows, excuse me, are showing the flow of the energy. So you should be able to look at a food web or a food chain and be able to tell what those arrows are and what's being transferred to what. A calorie, that is the measurement of energy that is stored in food. All living things need food to give them energy. That is how we continue to survive. So we eat because we need energy, and that brings us to the next slide. There are 4 purposes of animals' food. Okay, I love pizza. I love lasagna, brownies, cookies, you name it, I love it. But I don't eat those things because I like them. I eat food because it is necessary for me to survive. And that would be the 4 things: body repair, growth, motion. And when we mean motion, it's not just humans. It's easy for us to do what we need to do. But think about that lion in the savannah and needs to eat. He needs enough energy to be able to catch his next prey. Maintain body warmth. Penguins have to eat a lot of food to keep their body warmth. These are all things that ensure that we survive. Source of energy. The food of almost any kind of animal can be traced back to plants and then ultimately the sun. So it all starts, that goes back to what we said earlier with the producer being the first organism. Something has to eat that plant, and then something eats that organism, and then that's how our food is our energy is transferred, which ultimately came from the sun. Biotic, those are your living things or have lived. I bolded this, have lived. So an example would be a dead tree. The tree was once living. Note your examples here of what some living things could be. Abiotic, the A part means without. So abiotic things have never lived. So our examples there are sunlight, water, soil. Those things are non-living, never have lived. And this is the one thing that you really didn't get a lot of, and this is the only thing that's going to be on there, is to understand the difference between a habitat and a niche. Habitat is the place where they live. The niche is a role. Think of it as habitat is the home, niche is the job that they do. Okay, it's how they get their food. So know that, and you ought to be good to take your test. Any questions, have your mom message me.